Hi Minecrafters, Sarlacc here with another video for you. If you haven't taken a look at the step-by-step guide yet, there's a link below, check it out. Otherwise, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some of the design decisions in this latest build, primarily how they pertain to function and experience. We'll be going through quite a bit of information, so just bear with me. Starting off, function of the space is determined by the program. And the program is effectively a list of the types of spaces needed for this particular building. For this case, we need to obviously have room for the sheep to be hanging out. There need to be dye vats, and there needs to be workstations for processing the wool through all the stages. As far as adjacencies, it makes sense that the stronger connection between two spaces, the closer they'll be to each other. In this case, it also comes into play that the order in which things happened help determine where things are located in the building. For example, it wouldn't make sense to have the sheep hanging out here, to then bring them upstairs to shear, to bring the wool back downstairs to wash and dry, to bring it back upstairs to dye it. It's a lot of unnecessary up and down and makes it less efficient. And so you can see a little bit more about how things are built in what order in the guide. Otherwise, think through the process logically, and that'll really help determine the way the program is set up. And then heading down this way, once the layout of the building is established, how things go together need to factor in how people will experience the space. So this means design elements need to relate to a human scale. For the lower level here, it could be a very long, monotonous hallway, vast expanse that could feel endless if all the surfaces were smooth, plain, and continuous. And by using a repeated element that is the width of one of these stalls, a rhythm is created that we can intrinsically measure by breaking this larger space down into something more manageable through the use of patterns. So our minds are actually wired to be lazy. So we can process complex data, for example this long space, by deliberately making shortcuts. For example, to get from here back to the stairs, I only have to travel 6 units, a unit being 1 bay, versus needing to travel 40 or 50 meters, which is the length of the space. So the physical space hasn't shrunk at all, but our perception makes it more manageable and less daunting because it feels more focused around me. So I travel the same distance, but it just doesn't feel like I've traveled that far. For the second level here, the volume of the space is actually quite large, but that was necessary in order to have the proportions from the outside of the building look correct from a distance. And otherwise, a large space can be brought down to a more human scale by creating subdivisions. And here, it's actually been done twice. So the first one is the catwalk. And so it provides a functional circulation to get above the vats, but it also creates a horizontal plane that breaks up the volume. And it's not solid. You have this large gap in the middle, but our minds want to connect the dots and fill in that gap. So we create an artificial plane that slices through the large volume. And so then if we head up top, there's the other subdivision, which is done with the support structure. So you have the catwalk needs to hang from something, and so you have a subdivision of this bay essentially that's hanging from the larger support beam. And you'll notice also that this beam comes through and conveniently lines up with the peak of the arches from the outside, and the tension cables or whatever these would be also line up with the exterior structure. And so that's all done deliberately, as far as having these different elements reinforce each other to create a new division. And so from up here, it doesn't feel like I'm in such an empty expanse. And you might be able to argue that the ClearStore windows up top help create another lateral division, but it's more subtle, especially because it's so far up. But we'll not worry about that for now. Main point through all this is to understand that there's always reasoning behind each design decision you make. And it doesn't happen by accident. Um, at the same point, you don't need to overthink everything that will only make something simple appear daunting. And you might laugh, like, it's not simple, but it is. I mean, there are dozens of really small choices that are made through this process, and they just build upon one another. So taking something complex and breaking it down into manageable pieces. And you can see more of that in the guide. But otherwise, the most valuable tool in your kit at the end of the day is your own observation. If something doesn't feel right, then tweak it. You don't necessarily have to know why it's off, but your intuition will kind of key you in. And so you can play around and experiment until something works better, and eventually you'll start to see and figure out why. But you don't have to worry about that from the get-go. Alright, I'm cutting myself off, otherwise I'll be rambling forever. Check out the guide, there's a download available. Otherwise, have fun, be creative, check out the album. I'm out.